Hi everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about my current research, which is to do with young musicians, gender and sexuality. And to start, I'm not going to kind of go into the kind of background too much, but just to kind of give the premise, which I'm sure you all know, about recent research, discourse and action showing an increased determination to identify and address gender inequalities in the music industry. And as Sheila Whiteley has argued, studying gender in vocational popular music courses is crucial for students entering the so-called real world. So that's where I'm looking at that kind of intersection between the industry and popular music higher education. Inspired by discussions with my own students at Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, LIPA, easier to say, my research project explores experiences and issues relating to gender and sexuality for performers of popular music aged 18 to 25 in higher education, training or early career. And as part of a pilot study, I carried out semi-structured one-to-one interviews with 8 young musicians, focusing on their practices, their experiences, and any issues relating to gender and sexuality and their experiences of music education. So just to kind of quickly introduce them, not that I expect to remember them, these are pseudonyms by the way, but Lise, Lucy, Georgia, Christian and Ian, these were all final year LIPA music undergraduates at the time of my research, and Camilla and Simon were music graduates from LIPA in their early careers, and Ash is a music undergraduate from another UK institution, all in their early to mid-20s, white British, North American, North European or Scandinavian. So, brief introductions over. So the 3 themes I'm going to discuss from the interviews. Gender norms and stereotypes, networking and opportunities, and education, context and strategies. So first of all, gender norms and stereotypes. So I guess gender norms and expectations are closely related to the concept of stereotyping, which enables a consideration of the way in which prevailing and repeated categorizations might influence the treatment of individuals and groups. So some of the interviewees had experienced gender norms and stereotypes as shaping or constraining forces. So for example, Christian said, what I'm aiming to do musically is a lot about emphasizing vulnerability, which is often considered a bit away from traditional masculine persona. Another male musician said, Ian, this is, I feel like almost in a way to be a singer-songwriter, you have to have a little more femininity to be able to express and be in touch with your emotions. And a female student, Lee, she said, I feel like it's less likely that you'll be taken seriously if you're a girl and you're singing about important subjects. I'm really scared of discussing anything important. Interesting thoughts here from these young musicians. So, as Biddle and Jarman Ivans note, musical genres are gendered spaces and operate according to highly codified conventions. And arguably, both male musicians here were conscious of gender norms, but felt able to challenge them in their songwriting within genre conventions in a way that the female Lise found more difficult. Her perception that important subjects are stereotypically masculine confirms the prevalence of hegemonic masculinity in popular music culture, perhaps suggesting a tendency towards what Connell has called emphasized femininity. And although both Ian and Christian recognise the advantages of being, in Ian words, a straight white guy, the constraints of gender norms are not experienced exclusively by female musicians. In relation to performance, Ian sometimes felt the pressure of normative masculinity. He said, sometimes when I'm on stage, there's this need to be masculine, which he explained in this context as grown-up, commanding, guarded and cautious, as opposed to femininity, which he characterised as more childlike and playful. Popular music has always offered privileged space for gender play, according to Middleton, and as Hawkins says, the appeal of pop lies in playfulness and diversity. In relation to masculinity specifically, Biddle and Jarman Ivans argue that popular music operates as one of the dominant sites for the working through of masculine identities. The feelings expressed by these young musicians, however, suggest that while gender play is possible in popular music performance, creativity can be shaped and limited by the pressure to conform to gender norms and stereotypes. So, as well as the constraining effects on creative freedoms, several interviewees experienced gender norms and stereotypes as standards against which they felt unfairly judged. So Lise, for example, felt she was expected to be a less competent musician than her male peers, but at the same time was judged more harshly if she made a mistake, which you can see from the quote there. I think girls get less room to make mistakes. Years ago I was playing with a talented boy, I made a mistake, he was really upset, but she imagined if she'd been another male, he wouldn't have been quite so harsh. Lucy, she describes a duet that she formed with another young female musician, which challenged gender expectations due to Lucy's abrasive vocal style and her partner's high level of skill as a guitarist. She says all the time people just assumed we were going to be crap because we were two young girls, and they were always very shocked by both of us. Similarly, in Georgia's experience as a female drummer, gender stereotypes led to both mistaken assumptions about her role and patronising feedback. Like you get at gigs when you're setting the drum kit up, are you with the band, is one of the band members your boyfriend, and then after the gig, oh, you played well, I didn't expect you to be as good. So as previous research shows, for example from Green, Bogdanovich, Dubois, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, please correct me if I got that wrong. Stereotypical musical roles are linked with the gendering of musical instruments and practices, and deviation from musical norms can result in negative reactions. For Simon, being expected to be technically adept was a common experience. Every band I've been in, he said, it's always been a case of an expectation that I'm going to be good at plugging in things because I'm male, which confirms the long-standing symbolic links between technology and masculinity, which are often rightly construed as disadvantageous to women, but can also present unwelcome pressure for men. Masculinity norms also led to Simon feeling compelled to direct band rehearsals, which made him feel a bit guilty sometimes, or a little bit unnecessarily controlling a situation, where I'd rather just not have the pressure and let everyone else have input and decisions. Similarly, in relation to the male producer-female artist relationship, Christian felt unfairly judged against the gender stereotype of the male as a kind of authoritarian who is in charge, which in his view doesn't represent reality at all. It seems that female musicians often feel creatively constrained, underestimated, and unfairly judged, and male musicians also feel the limitations and pressures of gender norms and stereotypes. Hegemonic masculinity can create an environment for greater flexibility and gender play for male musicians. On the other hand, the discourse of toxic masculinity, with its associated characteristic of fragility, can lead to more rigid masculine norms and stereotypes. As Dyer argues, the more enforced the stereotype, the greater its degree of rigidity and shrillness. Okay, so on to networking. So Connor, Gill and Taylor note that in the cultural and creative industries, networking and maintaining contacts are crucial, and despite the myth that the sector is diverse, open and egalitarian, women are disadvantaged by the contacts culture, and gender inequality persists. Marion Leonard found similar issues arising from homosocial networking in the music industry and the sense of a boys' club or fraternity, in which male bonding took place in situations that blended work and leisure in a way that excluded women colleagues who missed out on networking opportunities. Most of my female interviewees offered similar accounts of musical networking as exclusionary of women. So in Camilla's experience, males tend to band together and help each other, even if they don't know each other very well. Lucy observed boys naturally, without them realising, are a little bit more involved in their own sex group than they think, suggesting a perception that homosocial networking is a natural tendency, at least among males. Georgia felt the strong presence of a lads' club among musicians at Lipper. She said they always go to each other before me for work, they always forget I'm a drummer. Although this practice was mirrored in her own networking and musical relationships with other women, so she would go to them first, but the inequality in numbers was problematic. I'd probably more so go to a woman than a man, so I think it works the other way, but there are less women than men, so that perpetuates the issue. Work opportunities for performing musicians are heavily dependent on strong networks. However, as Simon reported, the importance of image in performance, combined with gender stereotyping of particular instruments, can negatively impact work opportunities for females. He says brass is often perceived as quite masculine, and I know I've been picked over female candidates for image reasons. However, some females can benefit from the situation, as Georgia explained. I've been hired for gigs because I'm a woman before. There was a function band that wanted all women because it looks a bit different. Ian also pointed out the benefit of having a female band member. It's almost like a selling point to have a girl in a band. I think we got way more gigs because we had a female lead singer. Overall, though, the live music industry does not favour female musicians, as recent research highlights, by Larson 2017, for example. The Liverpool music scene, in which most LIPA music students participate, has been depicted, for example, by Cohen in 1991, as particularly male-dominated. For Georgia, this continues to be the case, as in her experience of playing a Liverpool venue. She says we were the only 2 women in the gig of 5 bands. Similarly, Simon perceives the Liverpool music scene as very masculine. It doesn't feel like you can go there and be gay or feminine or whatever. In his experience, many venues do not even cater for the possibility of female music participation. Every venue I've been to, there's never a female dressing room or a separate area for them. There's no expectation that women will be there on stage. Arguably, despite the advantage that can sometimes be gained from difference, the fact that female musicians are in the minority and their relative lack of power can contribute to weaker networks and perpetuate inequality of work opportunities. So, in terms of educational context and what they had to say about that, several of the interviewees noted the male and masculine domination of education environments. Lise learned to play her instrument in male-dominated groups, and she says, I've always felt a bit shy because I'm a woman and I don't feel like I can be as good. At LIPA, the fact that she was often the only girl in music improvisation classes consolidated her insecurities. She said, if you're put on the spot in front of 8 or 7 boys, it's going to be a lot more intimidating than if it's with a room full of girls. Georgia's confidence gained during her early single-sex education was challenged by moving to a mixed school aged 16. She says, even though I'd been drumming for at least 8 or 9 years at this point, I was more self-conscious than I'd ever been. Some male interviewees also commented on low confidence they perceived in their female peers. Ian noticed that for some female musicians at LIPA, in improv class there's a sort of timidness sometimes, even if they're fantastic. Arguably, some of these tendencies might not be solely attributable to gender, as it's difficult to fully distinguish the effects of gender from other traits. However, due to masculine hegemony, as Lise puts it, a lot of women feel less than a man if you're put next to each other. However, musicians of all gender identities can be challenged by male-dominated environments. Transgender male student Ash found it difficult to get involved in musical projects at college due to the social and emotional challenges of being misgendered constantly. He said, I use they pronouns, but at school introduced myself as he for ease, but I still get called she most of the time by most people, staff included. An additional frustration was the fact that there were proportionally very few instrumentalists that aren't men, including in the staff, leading to a lack of relevant role models and giving rise to feelings of being excluded as a girl, non-binary, not a cis-man drummer. In Simon's view, despite finding LIPA very safe in many ways, he felt that in terms of the staff and musical focus, the music course was very masculine and very heterosexual. This strongly normative masculine environment led to Simon finding LIPA quite intimidating at times. As Dubois argues, it's necessary to move beyond thinking about gender and gender equality as equal numbers of binary sexes, as this overlooks specific forms of discrimination facing trans, queer and non-binary individuals. The interviewee suggested several ways in which gender issues in music education could be addressed. Firstly, a more equal gender balance in learning environments would be a positive step. In relation to single versus mixed-sex learning environments, despite her difficulties, Lise did not advocate single-sex music education because she said you don't learn how it works and how to deal with it. Similarly, while Georgia found her formative single-sex education valuable, she recognised the need to be able to work with men. I think for me it was positive, she said, but obviously in the real world you can't work with women all the time. Also, discussion and awareness of gender was felt to be an important factor. For Georgia, relevant points about gender could be part of every module. In Ian's view, profiling gender outliers could inspire students to be themselves and experiment more. Simon emphasised the importance of breaking traditions in relation to instrument typing. We should try and encourage people to feel like there is no barrier. Further, Simon suggested moving away from talking about gender in such a binary way, as it's such a spectrum for many people. My research so far then suggests that vocational popular music higher education could contribute to gender equality by creating more equal and diverse gender representation in student cohorts and teaching teams through positive action. raising awareness of a wider diversity of gender identities, as well as issues and inequalities in the music industry across the curriculum, and encouraging and empowering students who want to push boundaries and challenge the status quo. In conclusion, my data are congruent with existing research that exposes gender inequalities in both the music industry and music education. It's encouraging, however, that enthusiasm for change is growing, and several interviewees argued there is increasing awareness and acceptance of wider diversity in relation to gender and sexual identities. These were self-selecting participants with an interest in the issues. However, movements such as the Everyday Sexism Project and Me Too indicate a broader shift in people's willingness to tolerate gender inequality. Hawkins observes, pop culture forms a site where identity roles are constantly evolving to fit social needs, and so vocational popular music higher education, although by definition music industry facing, should take account of this shift and avoid replicating existing inequalities. As Green argues, musicians and their teachers are in a strong position to resist the music industry's power to dictate commercially driven notions of musical success and failure. And for the future, this research project aims to explore gender-related experiences and issues for young musicians in more depth, expanding and diversifying the participant group to take account of a wider range of identities, experiences and perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. That's fascinating, wasn't it? And lots of rich source material. So I'm sure there are questions. There's certainly some time for questions. Going to ask the first question.
Well, thanks so much, Helen. That's a really interesting project. I'm going to do that thing where it's beyond the scope of your paper, but have you thought about some of the intergenerational things that may be going on at your institution or other institutions with, say, mature students? The reason I ask this is because knowing someone who works at a post-92 in the Southwest who has trans students, some of the mature students actively resist the pronouns that those students want to use, which I find very backward thinking. You know, it's not even ignorance, it's, you know, I'm actually resisting this, and how to handle that in a classroom, how to handle that when student satisfaction is there so important. It's very problematic. Long sort of comment, not a question, but have you thought about how some of those things play out in those educational settings?
Well, I guess that's something I'll look into more as the research progresses, because from the pilot study I've only talked with one trans student so far who's actually at another institution, not mine. And yeah, it's a very interesting question. But I mean, from what I heard from him, it did seem like, you know, people weren't kind of deliberately resisting, but just sort of forgetting more so. At my own institution, we don't actually really have any kind of intergenerational thing going on, because everybody seems to be pretty much the same kind of age. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess that it would be really interesting to explore that more. And I also want to explore not just in higher education, but in you know, kind of music support organisations that are more kind of out in the world. And you know, I think maybe those issues might crop up there as well. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Hi, thank you so much. Just curious, how are gender issues addressed at LIPA? I mean, is there a specific module on music and gender in the industry or something? Or is it spread out like one of the interview kind of suggested?
Yes, well at the moment we don't have a dedicated gender module because the course is so kind of practice focused. You know, the bit of the course that I teach, which is kind of the contextual studies bit, we have kind of weeks on gender and sexuality as part of that module, but I wish we could have a whole module, but no, not at LIPA. And I mean, it was interesting talking to some of these students who said, you know, they remembered when, you know, like a production lecturer would raise the issue of, you know, how kind of relatively few or how unknown female producers are, and how that really kind of stuck in her mind because the whole gender thing was talked about in another module, which is why that point kind of came up as, you know, it would be great to just not have it as a dedicated thing, but just kind of spread it out over the whole curriculum, so it just becomes part of the kind of general discourse in all aspects, really.
I think you illustrated very well how this, you know, gender and sexuality and identity is not a problem only for those who experience marginalised status, but also for it disadvantages even young white men.
Well,
in
exactly.
terms of
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. I mean, they
integrity.
recognise their advantage, but also
Yes.
the issues. Yeah.
Yes.
I was just wondering what the gender breakdown in the classes would be, and what's the percentage of male to female students?
I think at the moment on the music course at LIPA, I think it's about 2/3 male and 1/3 female among the students. I mean, probably among the staff, it's probably a bit less than that. And most of the female staff tend to be singing teachers. Yeah.
Is the title of the course music? Is it a broad music course?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Is the title of the course music, or is it a broad music course, or is it more music performance?
It's called music, but it's kind of popular music and music production and songwriting and performance. Yeah, that's what it is.
We've got time for just one more question.
Yes, I was thinking about empowerment through separatistic groups, because I have some producer colleagues who are just founded a few years ago these kind of groups in Stockholm, Sweden, and I wanted to ask you what do you think will be the result of these type of activities in maybe 10 or 15 years from now? What would that do to the music?
Did you say single sex groups?
And women and non-binary persons in this case.
Right. Okay. So separate groups for them to learn.
Yeah, because they have created groups like this, and I've been thinking a lot about what this will generate in the future.
Yes. It's an interesting question. Yeah, it's one that I've kind of discussed with a few people. The whole idea of single sex groups and how effective they are. But I guess the conclusion I've reached that they can be really useful to building confidence. But I guess they're not kind of useful as the only thing that happens.
As a compliment.
Yeah. So I think that you need both. Yeah.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.